Hello and welcome to my art studio here in Amsterdam. I'm Rose Wildsmith, mixed media process artist, and I love keeping sketchbooks. I love how it gives you a really safe place to experiment and explore, and I used to be absolutely terrified of ruining my sketchbook. And so what would happen is I would start the sketchbook, I'd do a couple of pages and then I'd totally abandon it because I felt like if I made one little mistake then the whole book was ruined. But it also gave me a real fear of the blank page, and I would feel really inhibited trying to start anything in my sketchbook. These days I feel totally differently. I don't feel a fear of the blank page anymore. I'm not scared of my sketchbook. I love my sketchbooks. And I'm going to share with you today 6 ideas for ways to start out by activating your page, getting something down onto your paper so that you've got a first layer done. It gets you over that blank page paralysis. You have something there then to respond to later on in different layers. Okay, so idea number 1 is to use Brusho powders and a water spray bottle. And if you haven't come across Brusho powders before, they're a great tool. They're made by Colourcraft and they are a water-soluble media, and they're like pigment crystals, so you can mix them up and use them as inks, or you can use them like I'm going to show you. I recommend poking holes in the lids of the little pots, and then you can shake the powder out just a little bit at a time because they're very highly pigmented, so you don't need a lot. I would recommend that you spray your paper first before you start, just to give the powder something to stick to. And then you can use your pots like a salt shaker and tap a little bit of powder out. Now a little goes a long way, so you don't need a huge amount. I'm just using random colours here, but you could be a bit more selective in terms of colour palette. And now the magic part is when you spray it again with the water bottle, it activates those crystals and kind of brings them to life. And some colour pots are made up of different pigments, and so when you activate them they kind of split into their different colours, and it can give a really nice effect. It looks a bit like fireworks or something. And then I like to blot it with kitchen paper. This gets rid of those really watery bits and just leaves the really nice mottled firework kind of effect on your paper. Here I'm using the black. It's made up of a lot of different pigments, so it splits really nicely. And here's the effect. Okay, number 2, acrylic inks. I love acrylic inks. They are also very highly pigmented and you don't need a lot of them. Here I'm using primary colours and I'm just using Daler-Rowney because that's what I have, but there are other brands that make acrylic inks. Make sure you shake them well, because sometimes they can separate when they've been stored. Just a few drops on the page. And here I'm using the water spray bottle again to spritz the inks and get them to run. and because it's highly pigmented, it maintains its colour and you get this really lovely effect. I'm just adding some blue here, but you can use whatever colours speak to you. You could leave it like that, or you could try this technique with the salt. If you sprinkle some salt on, especially this salt with quite large grains, as the acrylic ink and the water dry, the salt draws the water towards it and you end up with a really interesting texture left behind. You can just brush the salt off when everything's dried.
Okay, number 3, here I'm going to use acrylic paint, and these are by Amsterdam. Any brand that you want to use would be fine for this. These are kind of medium body paints. You want something that's not too fluid for this technique.
And here I've used 3 colours that are the similar sort of hue, but you might want to experiment using different colours. If you used complementary colours, you'd get some muddy areas, which might be quite nice, depending on what art you like to make. And here I'm using a brayer to roll out and make interesting serendipitous patterns and textures with the acrylic paint. I love the marks that the brayer makes, and where you've splotted the paint onto the paper you get these interesting marks and blobs. And isn't that great? That's a background in your sketchbook. That's all ready to go. And then if you've got a little bit of excess paint left over, you can then put it onto another blank page, and there's another spread background for you, all ready to go. Okay, next one is water-soluble media and gesso. So there are lots of different water-soluble medias out there. I'm using these Neocolor 2, the water-soluble crayons by Caran d'Ache, but you could use Woodies by Stabilo, you could use Inktense. There are lots of different things available. And I like these crayons because you can be really quite scribbly with them. And sometimes I like to close my eyes. It gives you a bit more of an unusual natural mark if you're feeling quite inhibited. Sometimes I like to choose the colour from the tray with my eyes closed as well to give it a bit more random chance to it. You want to get a really nice layer of scribbles, and then I really recommend using this kind of gesso. This is Liquitex gesso because it's nice and fluid and it flows out of the bottle really well, and then when you go in with your brayer it spreads really nicely. Some gessos can be quite thick, but this one's got a really nice viscosity to it. And because the gesso is a little bit liquidy, it activates the water-soluble crayons just a bit, but then it kind of seals them in. So then when you go back over with other layers, the water-soluble media is less likely to reactivate. There you go. A really nice page in your art journal and just some place to start, so it doesn't feel quite so intimidating as a blank page. Okay, the next technique, collage. Oh, I love collage, and I have a huge collection of collage papers that I've kept over the years. Here are some of them. These are papers from toilet rolls. I have some envelopes, gift card envelopes that I've saved, some wrapping paper that I've saved and photocopied. These are some marks that I've painted myself and then photocopied. This is an old book, and so you can really let your imagination run wild with the kind of papers that you use for this, and just take something that catches your eye. I really liked this little map kind of thing. You want to use some glue and some scissors. You could also just tear things out. You don't need to use scissors if you don't want to be very precise and have straight lines. Okay, and then just stick it in, and then you've immediately got something on a page. And if you get sticky fingers from using the glue stick, baby wipes are indispensable for that. I always have some to hand. This is from the website Omniglot. They have lots of different samples of writing systems from around the world, and I just love the different shapes and patterns that you get with the different writing systems. So here I'm using some of it in my sketchbook. This is some paper that I painted myself and then photocopied. And here you can see I'm tearing it rather than cutting. And you can just pinch the paper at the edge of the sketchbook so you know where to cut the nice straight line so it lines up nicely. There we go. Nice finished starting point. Okay, and the last prompt I have for you is free writing. This is a great way of adding background texture to your whole page using a ballpoint pen, and I'd recommend that rather than a pen that might smudge when you go over it. Free writing is the technique where you just write whatever you can think of without stopping. Even if you can't think of anything to write, you can just write, I can't think of anything to write. I can't think of anything to write. And eventually, you know, you can just write, I can see the sun, I am sitting in a chair. It doesn't really matter, because what therefore is for the texture of the writing in the background of your page. But if you get really into this, you can use it as a kind of meditative technique, which I love doing because it's amazing what comes out of your brain when you do free writing. You can do it whichever orientation feels right for you. I'm doing one side of the spread in one direction and the other side in another direction. And if you don't want anyone to read what you've written, you can always blot it out a bit with gesso, but the texture will still kind of be there in the background. So those are my 6 ideas for activating the page. I hope you enjoyed them, and I hope you give them a go and you find them interesting. Let me know how you get on in the comments. If you have any other ideas for ways to activate your sketchbook pages, leave a comment down below as well. In a future video, I'm going to go through how to build upon those first layers and start to build up into a fully formed spread with other ideas. So make sure you subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on that. And if you really enjoyed this video and found it helpful, please give it a like. It really helps. And thanks for watching, and see you next time. Bye.